Welcome to Say Yes to Chocolate. I'm Dr. Becky.
And I am Sara B. This episode is for the woman who has gone to the doctor, had labs done, had everything come back normal, but still doesn't feel normal and feels off.
And they're told everything looks fine, but they leave thinking, okay, but I don't feel fine.
Yeah. Yes. And that disconnect can be so unsettling.
Well, it can, because on one hand, you're super relieved that there's nothing serious wrong, right? Nobody wants that devastating diagnosis. But on the other hand, you're wondering if you're imagining things then, or is this just like my new normal? Is this just what I'm always going to be feeling? And if you just have to walk away just accepting that this is the reality.
And that's the part that many women just don't talk about.
Right. They often minimize it. They often just internalize it, or they just tell themselves this must just be aging, and they just accept it and settle. And I want to say something very clearly right away. If your labs are normal and you still don't feel like yourself, that experience is very real. And that's what this whole episode is about.
And it doesn't mean your doctor's missing something.
No. Medical tests are incredibly important. Everything that we do, whether it's imaging or lab work or seeing specialists, they're all important because they help rule out disease. But there's a very big difference between dysfunction and not feeling good and optimal versus fully dysfunctional to the point of disease. Disease is when you get a diagnosis. We're talking about most likely what's happening at the stage before diagnosis, where you can actually do something about it and be proactive. Medical tests are there to help identify serious problems so then they can be treated, right? So if everything is on the surface normal, there's nothing to treat. But I'm here to say that that actually is very nuanced, and that is what we're going to dive into.
So those labs aren't meant to actually measure everything.
No, labs don't measure things like resilience. They don't measure your body's recovery capacity. They don't measure how supported your systems feel from day to day. Because again, until there's dramatic breakdown, that nothing's going to show up in your lab work or even with imaging. So if you kind of think about it, we can go back to the house analogy. Mm-hmm. When things are just starting to have some minor cracks in your foundation or some little teeny tiny water leaks, but they're there and then gone as quickly as they show up, they can be really hard to see, right? You can have contractors come out, take a look, and they're like, everything looks good, it's sound. But it's not. And if it's left untreated or if it's left unaddressed, it turns into bigger and bigger things. And it's the exact same thing that's happening in your human body.
Right. So normal doesn't necessarily mean optimal.
Correct. That's exactly what we're talking about today.
So when women say they feel off, what are they usually describing?
So it's often really subtle things. Feeling more tired than usual. You just don't have the oomph that you used to have. You're just maybe less steady. You don't have the strength or the stamina as robust as you used to have. You're less motivated. You maybe have some brain fog. You don't have the drive that you used to have. You're more easily overwhelmed. It's easier to say no to things, mm-hmm. or it's easier to just give 50% rather than 100%. Yeah. You don't sleep as deeply. You don't wake up as refreshed. It's harder to feel joy maybe in things like you used to feel joy in. And then you just feel like your body just doesn't bounce back the way it used to. It's really subtle and it can be really difficult to explain. You just don't feel like yourself.
Yeah. And none of that's going to show up on lab work.
Very little of it is. Because these are early functional changes, like we just talked about, not actual true disease.
And that distinction actually really matters.
It really does. It's the distinction, because functional changes are often reversible at that stage. When they're addressed early before they can progress into disease, it becomes way more difficult to treat and reverse disease than it does to stop it in the first place.
Right. So it's really important not to be ignoring that.
Absolutely.
Because when we ignore it, it becomes a very big problem.
Yes.
So you've said many times that energy is the first thing to change.
Yeah, it usually is. Before somebody notices significant muscle loss or bone weakness or gets that devastating diagnosis, starting to notice like major balance issues, they often notice that their energy is shifting. And sometimes this can be as early as like your mid-30s.
So people might notice that they get tired sooner, they're not recovering as quickly, and that they're just maybe a little bit more injury prone as well.
Yeah, I used to see this all the time in the clinic. And a lot of times you go from like in your 20s and maybe even in your 30s, it's explainable, right? Like you overdid it at the gym, or you slipped and fell off the curb and hurt yourself, or you didn't have a good night's sleep. So of course you're going to be tired the next day. But it starts to become more insidious. And then all of a sudden sometimes we start to feel things or things start happening to us that we can't outright explain, right? We've all had that experience where we wake up and our lower back is just killing us and we literally went to sleep at night. Or we just had the best weekend, slept great, had not an overwhelmingly busy time. We start Monday morning and we're exhausted and there's really no explanation to it. So energy typically is the body's very first warning sign. And it also happens to be the easiest thing to ignore and or the easiest thing to explain away for other culprits.
And if you ignore it, the body finds a way to get the attention.
It's going to. It's always going to. There's just going to create more and more breakdown. Warning signals are going to get louder and louder and louder.
Yeah.
Until you finally listen.
And that's such an important thing to be aware of.
Yeah, for sure.
We hear this a lot in our wellness center.
Yeah.
Women saying, I didn't realize how off I felt until I started to feel better.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that can be so slow and so insidious that you truly don't realize just how much you've lost or how much fatigue there is or tiredness there is or just lack of zest there is until you start to get it back.
So when someone comes to you feeling off, where are we starting?
When somebody comes and they just feel off, they don't have any energy, they're just kind of blah, we start by looking at the body as a whole, as a large system, not a collection of isolated signs or symptoms. And that's a really important distinction because in our medical community, with the focus on trying to diagnose something so that it can be treated, we've compartmentalized the human body, right? We all see that now.
Yes.
We have specialists now. So you go to the heart doctor, you go to the GI doctor, you go to the brain doctor, you go to the women's health doctor. And it didn't used to be that way. Medicine, way back in the day, you had a primary care provider, right? And they looked at the system as a whole and tried to decipher where the dysfunction was before disease was diagnosed. And it's a little bit different now. And I think we need to get back to that perspective by looking at those signs and symptoms early on and figuring out where the dysfunction is.
So this is where our 4-switch system is coming into play.
Absolutely. So if you get those labs, you get the medical imaging and everything shows that it's potentially fine, everything looks good on paper, then we're going to go back to that distinction that normal does not necessarily mean optimal. Mm-hmm. And we're going to use the 4 switches to really hone in what those signs and symptoms are telling us. And those 4 switches are foundational, kind of like the foundation of a house, foundational for energy so that you can stay active, independent, and confident, especially as you age. And those are switch number 1 is strength. Number 2 is stability. Number 3 is energy. And number 4 is recovery, or your body's ability to rebuild and repair. And that dysfunction, those symptoms that you're feeling, lies within one of those switches.
And we think of them as switches that can be supported and turned back on.
Correct.
Not overnight, but with consistency.
With consistency, right. That's the reason we call them switches, because you can turn them on. And the sequence is different for everybody. Sometimes people need to really focus on turning the recovery switch on. Some people need to focus on turning the strength switch on and building up some muscle mass. It's where your metabolism is. Some people really need to focus on supporting the body at a cellular level and turning that energy switch on. So everybody's a little bit different. The prior 2 or 3 episodes, we really talked about how to decipher where we're going to start, because we don't start with adding more. We always talk about that. We start with looking inward and seeing what we need. We're going to listen to those signs and symptoms. And energy is often the very first place that people notice a negative shifting.
Exactly. And that's why we start with energy.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's probably the number 1 Googled question out there, right? Yes. That 3 a.m. Google, why am I so tired all the time?
Yes. So. Which is essentially the same as where's my energy?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such a relief realizing you don't need to wait for something to be wrong before you take care of it.
Absolutely. I think being proactive over reactive is the theme of where our focus needs to turn.
So supporting your body is one of the most proactive, empowering things you can do for yourself.
Support. That's the keyword right there. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that, Sarah. It's exactly right. It allows women to stay engaged, confident, and independent so much longer, but it also puts the power back in your hands. So you can absolutely make a difference and make a change. You don't have to just settle.
So one of the key takeaways from today is if you've ever left your doctor's office or your appointment after getting labs and you feel relieved that there's not a disease, but you feel confused, we just want you to know you're not alone.
Absolutely. And you're not imagining things either. And I don't want you to be disappointed that nothing was found, because again, let's go back to that key difference.
Right.
There's a difference between functioning normally and functioning optimally. Labs are designed to identify when something is well outside of normal, totally broke down, and into disease. When you get normal lab work, but you're still not feeling 100% or like yourself, it's not that there's nothing wrong with you, it's that your body is communicating before there becomes something wrong with you.
Yeah, and I just love that. Like, really, our body is constantly communicating to us, and we just have to listen.
We just have to listen. And then know that around here, we don't start by doing more. We start by supporting one of the 4 switches: strength, stability, energy, or recovery, in a way that fits our real life and answers the questions that are individualized for our struggles and signs and signals.
And that's what we're talking about next week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is how we're going to do that without overhauling our entire system or adding more. We're not going to be overhauling our whole life. We're not going to be adding more and more to do.
Yeah, so next week we are literally going to be talking about one of the simplest ways to feel better without overhauling your entire life. So make sure and tune in.
Mm-hmm. So if you made it all the way to the end of this week's episode, please comment with a heart of any color, because we heart ourselves and you. And until then, say yes to chocolate. Thanks for hanging out with us on Say Yes to Chocolate.
If today's episode gave you a win, something to think about, or even just a smile, we'd love it if you'd subscribe, rate, and share it with a friend.
Want more? Join our email newsletter so you don't miss a beat, and come find us on all the social channels at Say Yes to Chocolate Podcast for all the quick hints and tips.
And don't forget, you can always send us your questions or episode ideas. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep it simple, stay curious, and always say yes to chocolate.